park ranger stops cold seeing this strange cave. He calls 911 when he discovers what's inside. The crisp autumn air filled Jack Davis's lungs as he hiked through the dense northern section of Blackwood National Park. 23 years as a park ranger had taught him to appreciate these solitary patrols, especially in this remote quadrant where visitors rarely ventured. The morning fog clung to the ancient pines, casting an ethereal quality over the wilderness that Jack had sworn to protect. Today's route was a standard sweep, checking for illegal campsites, monitoring wildlife activity, and ensuring trail markers remained visible. Jack moved with practiced efficiency, his weathered hands occasionally brushing against tree bark, a habit he'd developed over decades in the forest. At 52, his body carried the marks of a life outdoors, sun-leathered skin, a slight limp from an old climbing accident, and eyes that could spot a deer track from 20 yards away. Nothing out of the ordinary, he muttered to himself, making a note on his tablet about some recent bear activity. The radio at his hip crackled. "Base to Davis, check-in." Jack pressed the talk button. "Davis here. All clear in Sector 17. Moving to 18 now." "Copy that. Storm front moving in by evening. Don't stay out too late." "Roger that." Jack clipped the radio back to his belt and checked his watch. Plenty of time to finish his rounds before the weather turned. As he rounded a massive boulder marking the boundary between sectors, something caught his eye, a subtle disruption in the undergrowth that wouldn't register with an untrained observer. Jack paused, squinting at the forest floor. The ferns and moss showed signs of recent compression, not from wildlife, but from human footprints. "That's odd," he whispered, crouching to examine the disturbance. The park hadn't issued permits for this area in months. Following the barely perceptible trail, Jack moved deeper into the woods, his senses heightened. The path wound through a thicket of thorny bushes that would deter casual hikers, another red flag. Someone had deliberately chosen a difficult route to avoid detection. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, Jack stopped abruptly. The forest opened into a small clearing, and there, partially obscured by vines and strategic arrangements of fallen branches, was the mouth of a cave. It wasn't on any of the park's geological surveys or maps. "What the hell?" Jack murmured, approaching cautiously. The cave entrance had been deliberately camouflaged, with branches and foliage arranged to blend seamlessly with the surrounding forest. Only his decades of experience had allowed him to spot the inconsistencies in the natural pattern. Jack reached for his radio, then hesitated. He needed to know what he was reporting first. Drawing his flashlight and resting his other hand on his service weapon, he ducked beneath the natural archway and entered the darkness. The temperature dropped immediately, the cool subterranean air a stark contrast to the autumn day outside. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a passage that extended deeper than he expected. Natural limestone formations had been partially cleared to create a walkable path, another sign of human intervention. "Hello?" Jack called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Park Ranger! Anyone in here?" Only silence answered him. As he ventured further, the cave widened into a larger chamber. Jack's flashlight beams swept across the space, and what he saw made him freeze. This wasn't just a geological formation, it was being used as a shelter. Worn sleeping bags and blankets were arranged in a semicircle around the remains of a small, ventilated fire pit. Plastic containers with tightly sealed lids stood organized against one wall, clearly food storage designed to keep out wildlife. A crude wooden shelf held personal items, a few books with damaged spines, handcrafted tools, and what appeared to be journal notebooks. "Jesus," Jack whispered, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Homeless encampment? Survivalists? Drug operation? None seemed to fit the organized yet desperate atmosphere of the cave. He approached the personal belongings, careful not to disturb anything that might later serve as evidence. The journals contained erratic writings, some pages filled with what looked like bizarre rules and schedules, others with paranoid ramblings about them and the Watchers. The handwriting varied, suggesting multiple authors. Jack's unease deepened. This wasn't a simple case of illegal camping. Something more disturbing was happening here. As his flashlight beam skimmed across the far corner of the cave, it illuminated a small pile of clothing, extra layers for the increasing cold, he presumed. And then, protruding from beneath a gray wool blanket, he spotted a flash of bright pink. Jack's heart stuttered in his chest. With shaking hands, he reached for the fabric, pulling it carefully from the pile. A child-sized jacket, the once vibrant pink now faded and soiled with years of wear, unfurled in his grasp. The left sleeve had a distinctive repair, a small heart-shaped patch covering what had been a tear. The world around Jack seemed to tilt on its axis as his mind catapulted 15 years into the past. His daughter, Emma, 8 years old and laughing, twirling in her favorite pink jacket before leaving for school. Emma, tugging at his sleeve that morning, insisting he fix the tear with something pretty, Dad, not just boring thread. Emma, walking to the bus stop, turning to wave goodbye, the last time he ever saw her. Jack's legs gave way, and he sank to his knees, clutching the jacket to his chest. The search parties, the investigation, the gradual, agonizing transition from missing to presumed dead, all of it crashed back like a physical blow. No, 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 he gasped, unable to process the impossibility of finding Emma's jacket here, now, 15 years later. His hands trembled violently as he examined the inside collar where his wife had written their daughter's name in permanent marker. The ink had faded but was still legible. Emma Davis. A soft sound from deeper in the cave jolted Jack back to the present. He whipped around, flashlight beam cutting wildly through the darkness. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice raw with emotion. Silence, then another shuffle. Jack rose unsteadily to his feet, one hand still clutching the jacket, the other reaching for his service weapon. "This is Park Ranger Davis. I need you to come out slowly with your hands visible." His training took over, steadying his voice despite the emotional tempest within him. At first, nothing happened. Then, gradually, shadows shifted in the darkness beyond his flashlight's reach. One figure emerged first, an emaciated woman with long, matted hair and wary eyes that squinted against the light. Behind her, others appeared, at least 5 people, all showing signs of malnutrition and prolonged isolation. Their clothes were mismatched and worn, their faces pale from lack of sunlight. "Please," the first woman whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Are you real? Are you really from outside?" Jack stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. These people looked like prisoners or refugees, yet there was no prison or war zone for hundreds of miles. "I'm real," he managed to say. "I'm a park ranger. Who are you? How long have you been here?" The group exchanged glances, a silent communication born of shared captivity. Then the woman in front took another tentative step forward, her eyes fixed on the pink jacket in Jack's hands. "You found it," she said softly. "I knew I shouldn't have kept it, but I couldn't. I couldn't let it go." Jack's flashlight beam fully illuminated her face now. Behind the dirt, behind the years of hardship and fear, behind the goneness that had sharpened her once soft features, he saw something that stopped his heart entirely. A small crescent-shaped scar above her right eyebrow, from when she'd fallen off her bike at age 6. The woman tilted her head slightly, a gesture so familiar it sent a physical pain through Jack's chest. Her eyes, the same unusual hazel that had stared up at him from a crib 23 years ago, filled with tears. "Dad?" The word emerged as barely a whisper, a fragile hope trembling in the darkness. Jack's flashlight clattered to the cave floor, its beams spinning wildly before settling on the stone ceiling. In its ambient light, father and daughter stared at each other across a 15-year void that had suddenly, impossibly, closed in an instant. "Emma?" Jack's voice broke on the name he'd stopped speaking aloud years ago, when the pain became too much to bear. The cave's cool air couldn't touch the heat of shock that flooded through him. His daughter, his little girl who'd been mourned, whose empty casket had been lowered into the ground while he'd clutched his wife's shaking form, was standing before him, grown into a woman he'd never had the chance to know. The world Jack had carefully reconstructed after Emma's disappearance shattered in an instant, its fragments spinning away into the darkness of the cave. Time seemed to stop in the cold confines of the cave. Jack stood immobilized, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Emma, his Emma, alive after 15 years of grief, nightmares, and a slowly fading hope that had eventually died with his wife 3 years ago. "Is it really you?" he whispered, his voice catching on each word. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. The way she blinked rapidly to clear her vision, a habit she'd had since childhood, confirmed what seemed impossible. This was no hallucination born of a grieving father's desperate wish. Jack closed the distance between them in 2 staggering steps, his arms enveloping his daughter in a desperate embrace. She felt so fragile beneath his touch, bones too prominent under skin that hadn't seen proper nourishment in years, yet her fingers gripped the back of his uniform with surprising strength. "I never stopped looking," he choked out against her matted hair. "Even when everyone else gave up, I never." "I know, Dad," Emma whispered against his chest. "I used to imagine you searching for me. It kept me going." A soft cough from behind Emma pulled Jack back to the reality of the situation. The other captives, 4 women and 1 man, watched the reunion with expressions that mingled hope with profound wariness. Jack recognized the look from rescued hikers who'd been lost for days. These people had been lost much longer. "We need to get you all out of here," Jack said, his ranger training resurfacing through the emotional storm. "I'll call for emergency response. Medical teams, police." "No!" Emma jerked back from his embrace, panic flashing in her eyes. "They'll find us if you call for help. They always do." "Who will find you, Emma? Who did this to you?" Jack gently gripped her shoulders, meeting her gaze directly. Emma's eyes darted toward the cave entrance, then back to her father. Years of ingrained fear battled against the trust she'd once had in the man before her. The other captives shifted nervously, exchanging glances loaded with unspoken dread. "The family," she finally said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "That's what they call themselves. Their leader, the father." Emma's voice caught on the word, as if it physically hurt to say it. "He tells everyone the world outside is dead. That it destroyed everything except what he saved." One of the other women stepped forward, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. "They took me 8 years ago," she said. "From a gas station in Colorado. I was on a road trip with friends. They finished my boyfriend when he tried to fight them." "Harmony," Emma said softly, the name clearly not the woman's original one. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Harmony interrupted, a sudden fierceness breaking through her fearful demeanor. "If your father can help us, he needs to know what he's up against." She turned to Jack. "They don't just kidnap people. They erase them and remake them. New names, new histories, new families formed according to the father's will." Jack struggled to maintain his composure as the horror of what Emma and these others had endured began to coalesce into understanding. "How many of you are there?" "How many, captives?" "Over 30 at the main compound," Emma replied. "Children born into the family, people taken like us, a few who joined willingly before realizing what it really was." "And where is this compound?" Jack asked, already reaching for his radio. Emma shook her head vigorously. "No, Dad. You don't understand. The family has people everywhere, Park Service, local police, even some state officers. That's how they've operated for so long without being caught. They monitor radio frequencies, official channels." Jack's hand froze halfway to his belt. The implication sent ice through his veins. If Emma was right, calling for backup might alert the very people responsible for her abduction. "Tell me everything," he said, lowering his hand. "From the beginning." Emma sank down onto a nearby rock, her energy seeming to drain away as memories surfaced. The others gathered close, their presence offering silent support. "I was walking to the bus stop that morning," she began, her voice distant. "A van pulled up, and a man asked for directions to the elementary school. I told him I went there and could point the way. That's all I remember until waking up somewhere dark. They kept me drugged for days." She paused, closing her eyes briefly before continuing. When I finally came to fully, they told me the world had ended. That nuclear war had destroyed everything, and only those in the Father's protection had survived. I was 8. I believed them, especially after they showed me videos they'd created. Footage of destruction, cities in ruins. There were others like me. Emma continued. Children taken from different places. We were assigned to new mothers and fathers within the family. They kept us isolated in the compound at first, deep in the wilderness. As we grew older and proved our loyalty, some were allowed more freedom, working security or supply runs. The male captive spoke up, his voice surprisingly steady. They run a sophisticated operation. Forged documents, multiple identities, properties registered under shell companies. The father was some kind of tech executive before he started the cult. He knows how to stay hidden. Jack's mind raced through the implications, police training from his early career before the Park Service kicking in. But you escaped. How? Gradually, Emma explained. For years I believed what they told us. Then Riley, she gestured to the man who had spoken, was brought in 3 years ago. He was older, had more life experience to draw on. He recognized the inconsistencies in their story and started secretly questioning things. Riley nodded. I was an environmental engineer before they took me. I noticed things about our surroundings that didn't match their doomsday narrative, wildlife that shouldn't have survived nuclear fallout, weather patterns that were normal for the region. He helped me see the truth, Emma said, reaching for Riley's hand in a gesture that spoke of a bond forged in shared trauma. Once I started doubting, I began watching the guards more carefully, mapping their rotations, looking for weaknesses. 6 weeks ago, during a supply transfer, we managed to create a distraction and slip away. Riley continued. We've been living rough, moving frequently, staying off main trails. We knew they'd be hunting us. We weren't sure where we were until yesterday, Emma added. That's when I realized we were in Blackwood. I remembered coming here with you and Mom when I was little. I thought maybe if we could find a ranger station. Her voice trailed off as fresh tears filled her eyes. I never imagined you would be the one to find us. Jack's throat tightened with emotion, but a ranger's pragmatism kept him focused. How many are looking for you? Are they armed? The Guardians, that's what they call their security force, usually travel in groups of 3 or 4, Riley answered. And yes, they're armed. Hunting rifles, handguns. They're trained to live off the land, track people through wilderness. Former military, some of them. Jack nodded grimly, years of law enforcement experience telling him what they were up against. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was potentially a hostage situation with dangerous, well-organized hostiles. I need to call this in, he said firmly. Not on the radio, but on my satellite phone. Direct to the FBI field office in Portland. I have a contact there who is a local, someone I trust. Emma looked at her father with a mixture of hope and terror. Dad, if you do this, if you help us, they'll never stop coming for us. For you too. Jack cupped his daughter's face in his weathered hands, seeing both the woman she'd become and the child he'd lost in her eyes. Emma, I've spent 15 years imagining every possible scenario of what happened to you. I've faced the worst fears a parent can have. Nothing. His voice broke, then steadied. Nothing could make me turn away now. He straightened up, decision made. Reaching for the satellite phone in his pack, Jack paused as Emma suddenly grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with renewed panic. Wait, she whispered urgently. I think I heard something outside. Jack froze, satellite phone in hand, his senses immediately shifting into high alert. 23 years in the wilderness had taught him to trust the stillness that followed such warnings, nature's own alarm system. The cave had fallen eerily silent, even the dripping water seeming to pause in anticipation. Get back! He mouthed silently to the group, motioning them toward the deeper recesses of the cave. Reaching for his service weapon, Jack moved with practiced stealth toward the entrance, staying close to the wall where his silhouette wouldn't be visible from outside. The mixed smell of pine and autumn decay drifted in from the forest, but beneath it was something else, a trace of cigarette smoke and gun oil. Human scents that didn't belong in this remote sector. His radio crackled suddenly in the silence, making Emma flinch visibly. "Base to Davis, status update over." The dispatcher's voice echoed off the cave walls. Jack quickly adjusted the volume, cursing the timing. Before he could respond, another voice cut through, not from his radio, but from just outside the cave entrance. "No need to answer that, Ranger. We'll take it from here." Jack's blood ran cold as the cave entrance darkened with approaching figures. 3 men emerged into view, backlit by the afternoon sun. Unlike the disheveled escapees, these men were well equipped and carried themselves with military precision. Each wore rugged outdoor clothing in earth tones, with tactical vests holding various tools and weapons. Their faces bore the weathered look of men who lived primarily outdoors, but their eyes held something that made Jack's instincts scream danger, a fanatical steadiness that reminded him of wildlife documentaries showing predators fixated on their prey. The leader stepped forward, his movement fluid and confident. In his mid-40s with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard, he carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to command. A hunting rifle was slung casually over his shoulder, but his right hand rested near the holstered pistol at his hip. "Ranger Davis," the man said, his voice carrying an unsettling pleasantness. "We've been watching you for quite some time. I'm Marcus." He gestured to the men flanking him. "These are my brothers Seth and Caleb." Behind Jack, he could hear Emma's sharp intake of breath at the names. "This area is restricted to park personnel," Jack replied evenly, keeping his body positioned between the intruders and the group behind him. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Marcus smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "We both know that's not how this is going to work. Our missing family members are with you, and we've come to take them home." His gaze shifted past Jack, focusing on something, or someone, behind him. "Number 8. You've caused quite the commotion. Father is very disappointed." Jack felt Emma trembling behind him, and the protective instinct that had lain dormant for 15 years roared back with overwhelming force. "Her name is Emma," he growled. "And she's not going anywhere with you." For a brief moment, Marcus looked genuinely perplexed. Then understanding dawned in his cold eyes. "Ah, the original father." He nodded as if solving a puzzle. "I should have recognized you from her photographs. You know, she kept your picture hidden in her mattress for years. Quite against our rules." He took another step forward. "This explains much. A fortuitous reunion, but ultimately meaningless. The outside world has nothing to offer our family anymore." "You're lying to them," Jack said firmly. "There was no apocalypse, no end of the world. You've been keeping them prisoner." "Prisoners?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "We saved them from a society bent on self-destruction. We gave them purpose, protection, belonging. What did your world give them? Violence. Emptiness. The illusion of freedom while corporate masters pulled their strings." He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. "We simply removed the pretense. Our community is honest about its constraints." Jack's mind raced through options. His service weapon against 3 armed men gave him poor odds, especially with 5 vulnerable civilians behind him. The radio at his belt offered no help if Emma was right about the cult's connections to local authorities. The satellite phone in his pocket was their best hope, but he needed time to use it. "Ranger," Marcus continued, his voice hardening slightly, "this can end 2 ways. You step aside and let our family members return with us, or there will be another tragic accident in these woods. Perhaps a ranger who ventured too close to an unstable cave system." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward the ceiling. "These limestone formations can be so unpredictable." As if to punctuate his threat, Seth, the bulliest of the 3 men, shifted his pack, revealing blocks of what appeared to be industrial explosives. "You would finish an employee?" Jack asked, playing for time while slowly, imperceptibly moving his hand toward his pocket. "That would bring every agency from here to Washington down on your compound." Marcus shrugged. Accidents happen in the wilderness. By the time anyone investigates thoroughly, we'll be relocated. The family has contingency plans for every scenario. His voice took on an edge of impatience. Enough talk. Step aside, Ranger. Dad, Emma whispered from behind him, her voice breaking. They'll finish you. Jack turned his head slightly, never taking his eyes completely off the three men. I'm not losing you again, Emma, he murmured back. Marcus's expression hardened as he watched the exchange. Seth, Caleb, secure our family members. I'll handle the Ranger. The two men moved forward as one, their movements coordinated with practiced efficiency. Jack raised his service weapon, knowing it would likely be his only shot before they returned fire. Stop right there, he commanded, falling back on decades of authority in his voice. Officer, stand down. The men hesitated, looking to Marcus for direction. In that moment of uncertainty, Jack's radio crackled again. Base to Davis, acknowledge immediately or we're sending a response team to your last known coordinates. Storm system approaching. Over. The distraction was slight, but enough. Seth lunged forward, faster than Jack anticipated for a man his size. Jack fired once, the shot going wide as Seth tackled him to the ground. The impact sent searing pain through Jack's shoulder as it collided with the cave floor, his service weapon skittering away into the darkness. Chaos erupted in the confined space. The escapees scattered deeper into the cave as Caleb moved to pursue them. Marcus stood in the entrance, drawing his pistol with practiced calm. Unfortunate, he said, training the weapon on Jack, who was still struggling under Seth's weight. But not unexpected. Through the ringing in his ears from the gunshot, Jack heard Emma's scream, not of fear, but of rage. A lifetime of suppressed anger catalyzed into action as she launched herself at Caleb, a jagged rock clutched in her hand. The improvised weapon connected with the side of the man's head with surprising force, sending him stumbling into the cave wall. Run! She shouted to the others. The back passage! Marcus's face contorted with cold fury. Enough! He bellowed, firing a warning shot into the cave ceiling. Limestone fragments rained down, dust filling the air. Jack used the momentary distraction to free one arm, driving his elbow into Seth's solar plexus with all the strength he could muster. The man's grip loosened enough for Jack to roll free, scrambling toward his fallen weapon. Marcus swung his pistol toward Jack, but hesitated, a fatal mistake. From the shadows, Riley emerged with the sudden speed of desperation, wielding one of the heavy flashlights Jack had dropped. The aluminum cylinder connected with Marcus's wrist with a sickening crack, sending the pistol flying. The passage! Riley shouted, grabbing Emma's arm and pulling her toward a narrow opening at the rear of the cave that Jack hadn't noticed before. It leads to the old mine shaft. We can lose them there. Jack scooped up his service weapon and fired twice at the cave entrance, not aiming to hit but to force Marcus to take cover. Go! He shouted to Emma. I'll be right behind you. For a heartbreaking second, Emma hesitated, her eyes locked on her father's face as if memorizing it, afraid this reunion might be as brief as it was miraculous. I promise, Jack said, the words carrying the weight of 15 years of searching. Go now! Emma nodded once, then disappeared into the passage with Riley and the others as Jack laid down covering fire. The narrow passage twisted into darkness, barely wide enough for an adult to navigate. Jack squeezed through last, holstering his weapon as limestone walls scraped against his shoulders. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind him, Marcus shouting commands, the clatter of equipment, a pained grunt as someone navigated the tight entrance. Emma? Jack called in a harsh whisper, his voice bouncing off the close walls. Here, Dad, came her reply from somewhere ahead, the word Dad still sounding foreign on her adult tongue. Jack's flashlight illuminated the passage, an old exploration tunnel that likely predated the park's establishment. Rotting timber supports lined sections of the ceiling, while rusted rail tracks occasionally emerged from beneath decades of sediment on the floor. The air grew staler as they progressed, carrying the mineral scent of undisturbed earth. After several minutes of hunched movement, The passage widened into a junction chamber where mining equipment lay abandoned, frozen in time. Emma and the others waited there, faces pale in the beam of Jack's flashlight. "They're right behind us," Jack said, checking his satellite phone. The screen glowed to life. No signal this deep underground. "We need a plan." Riley stepped forward, his previous career as an environmental engineer evident in his quick assessment of their surroundings. "These are the Blackwood silver mines. Abandoned in the 1940s after a collapse finished 12 miners." He gestured to the 3 branching passages. "If memory serves, the western tunnel eventually connects to an air shaft that reaches the surface." "You studied the area before escaping?" Jack asked, impressed despite the dire circumstances. Riley nodded. "The family's compound is about 15 miles northeast of here. I memorized whatever maps I could access during my assigned duties in their archives." Jack quickly took stock of their resources: his service weapon with limited ammunition, the satellite phone, a basic first aid kit, emergency rations, and his detailed knowledge of the park above them. Not much against 3 armed cultists with military training. "How well do they know these tunnels?" he asked. "The Guardians use them sometimes," Emma replied, her voice steadier now that they were in motion. "But mostly the main passages. They avoid the western sections because of the collapse risk." An idea formed in Jack's mind: dangerous, but with better odds than a direct confrontation. "Listen carefully," he said, gathering the group closer. "We're going to split up." Alarm flashed across Emma's face. "No, Dad. It's our best chance," Jack interrupted gently. "They can't follow everyone, and it increases the odds of someone reaching help." He turned to Riley. "You know the tunnel system and the outside terrain. Take Emma and 2 others through the western passage to that air shaft. Get to the old ranger station in Sector 12. It's seldom used but has an emergency radio with a direct line to regional headquarters." Riley nodded grimly, understanding the responsibility being placed on him. "The remaining 2 will come with me through the northern passage," Jack continued. "It should lead toward the main cave system entrance near Crawford Ridge. We'll be the decoys, make noise, leave obvious tracks. Once we reach the surface, we'll head east initially, then circle back west toward the ranger station. That should draw them away from your group." Emma protested, her newly found father's face illuminated in the harsh beam of the flashlight. "They won't hesitate to finish you." Jack tried to smile reassuringly, though he knew the plan's risks all too well. "Your old man knows this park better than anyone. And I have this." He patted his service weapon. "Plus 23 years of dealing with poachers, drug operations, and the occasional bear. Marcus and his brothers are dangerous, but they're not supernatural." Harmony, the woman who had spoken earlier, stepped forward. "I'll go with you, Ranger. Before they took me, I was training for search and rescue in Colorado. I can move quickly through rough terrain." "Me too," said another woman, shorter but with a determined set to her jaw. "I'm Lisa. I grew up hunting with my dad in Montana before they took me 4 years ago." Jack nodded, grateful for their courage. "All right. Emma, Riley, and the others will take the western passage. Harmony, Lisa, and I will go north." Emma grabbed her father's arm, her fingers digging in with desperate strength. "I just found you," she whispered, voice breaking. "I can't lose you again." Jack pulled his daughter into a fierce embrace, this adult stranger who carried his child's soul. "You won't," he promised into her hair. "When I give the signal, run. Don't look back, don't wait. Get to that ranger station and call for help. I'll meet you there." A crash and muffled curse echoed from the passage behind them. The cultists were getting closer. Jack pulled a flare gun from his belt, standard equipment for rangers in remote areas. "This is the signal. When I fire it, the sulfur compounds will mix with the methane pockets in these old mines. It won't cause a major collapse, but it'll create enough smoke and falling debris to slow them down and cover your escape." "How can you be sure it won't bring the whole tunnel down on us?" Riley asked skeptically. "I can't," Jack admitted. But these mines have stood for 80 years through earthquakes and dynamite blasting for the new highway. They're more stable than they look. Another sound from behind, closer now. They were out of time. Remember, western passage to the air shaft, then straight to the ranger station in Sector 12. Jack instructed, handing Riley his Park Service compass. It's 8 miles from the likely exit point, mostly downhill. The station is marked on this. He passed over his topographical map. The emergency radio is in a locked cabinet, access code 5571. Emma clutched her father's hand one last time, her eyes memorizing his face. Then, with visible effort, she steeled herself and turned to her group. Let's go. Jack waited until they disappeared into the western passage before turning to Harmony and Lisa. Ready? Both women nodded, their faces grim but determined. Jack raised the flare gun toward the ceiling junction where several small fissures suggested a weakness in the rock structure. He squeezed the trigger, and a bright red flare shot upward, striking the limestone with a shower of sparks. The effect was immediate. The chemical reaction with naturally occurring gases created a billowing cloud of acrid smoke as small rocks and dust rained down from the disturbed ceiling. Now! Jack shouted, pushing Harmony and Lisa toward the northern passage as the chamber filled with choking dust and the ominous sound of shifting rock. They plunged into the darkness of the northern tunnel just as a larger section of ceiling collapsed behind them, sealing off the junction chamber. Jack couldn't tell if it was his flare or the cultists using their explosives in pursuit, but the resulting barrier would buy them precious time either way. The three of them half ran, half stumbled through the twisting passage, guided only by Jack's flashlight beam dancing across the uneven floor. Years of Park Service training had taught Jack to maintain a mental map even while in motion. They were heading roughly northeast now, which would eventually bring them to one of the main cave system entrances near a popular hiking trail. After what felt like an eternity of labored breathing and aching muscles, the passage began to slope upward. Fresher air filtered down, carrying the scent of pine and approaching rain. We're almost to the surface. Jack wheezed, his lungs burning from the exertion and residual dust. Just as hope began to rebuild, a gunshot echoed through the passage, the sound distorted by the tunnel's acoustics. A bullet ricocheted off the rock wall near Jack's head, sending limestone fragments flying. Down! He shouted, pushing both women behind an outcropping of rock. Drawing his service weapon, he fired twice into the darkness behind them, not aiming to hit but to force their pursuers to take cover. They must have found another way around the collapse. Harmony gasped, blood trickling from a cut on her cheek where flying rock had struck her. Lisa's eyes darted around desperately. What now? Jack checked his ammunition, 4 rounds left. Not enough for a prolonged engagement. The mouth of the cave was visible now, a faint grayish light perhaps 100 yards ahead. Outside, the approaching storm had darkened the sky prematurely, which would provide some cover once they reached the forest. When I say run, head straight for the exit, Jack instructed in a hushed voice. Once outside, veer right and stay low in the underbrush. The storm will help mask our movement. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by Marcus's voice echoing off the stone walls. Ranger Davis! There's nowhere to go. The weather's turning, you're leading these women into a dangerous situation. Jack almost laughed at the absurdity, as if being hunted by armed cultists wasn't the real danger. He leaned out slightly, firing another round to keep their pursuers at bay, mentally counting his remaining ammunition. 3 bullets now. Ready? Jack whispered to Harmony and Lisa. They nodded, faces set with determination. Run! The women darted forward as Jack fired again, providing cover. He followed immediately after, running in a zigzag pattern to make himself a harder target. A bullet whizzed past his ear, so close he felt the displacement of air. They burst from the cave mouth into the gathering gloom of late afternoon. The promised storm was rolling in fast, dark clouds boiling overhead and the wind picking up force through the trees. Perfect cover, if they could use it right. This way, Jack gasped, directing them toward a dense patch of undergrowth. They crashed through the vegetation, branches whipping at their faces and arms as they fled. Behind them, Shouts indicated their pursuers had also reached the surface. Jack paused momentarily, orienting himself. The years spent patrolling this sector flooded back, every trail, ravine, and landmark imprinted in his memory. Crawford Ridge is east of here, he panted. If we head that way, we can make it look like we're circling back toward the original cave, while actually moving toward the ranger station on a different route. Harmony nodded, her search and rescue training evident in her quick grasp of the strategy. Leave obvious signs at first, then gradually eliminate them? Exactly. The three moved purposefully through the forest, initially breaking branches and disturbing ground cover, then progressively becoming more careful, stepping on rocks and fallen logs to avoid leaving tracks. The deepening gloom and increasing rainfall helped obscure their trail. After 20 minutes of hard travel, a distant crack split the air, different from the earlier gunshots. Thunder, but not from the storm. Explosives, Jack realized aloud. They're trying to flush us out or seal the tunnels. Lisa's face paled. What about the others? Emma's group. They should be well clear by now, Jack assured her, hoping his voice conveyed more confidence than he felt. The western tunnel would have taken them in the opposite direction. They pushed on, the terrain growing steeper as they ascended a wooded slope. Jack's shoulder throbbed where he'd hit the cave floor earlier, and his breath came in ragged gasps. 23 years of ranger fitness couldn't fully compensate for 52 years of age, especially after the day's trauma and exertion. Suddenly, Harmony froze, raising a hand in warning. Jack and Lisa immediately went still, straining to hear over the pattering of rain on leaves. There it was, the snap of a branch, the rustle of movement too deliberate to be wildlife. Someone was paralleling their course, moving through the trees to their left. Jack gestured for them to change direction, angling right toward a rocky outcrop that would provide both cover and a defensible position. They had nearly reached it when a voice called out from the trees. Stop right there! It wasn't Marcus or his men. The voice had the clipped authority of law enforcement. Jack hesitated, unsure if this was a genuine officer or one of the cult's alleged infiltrators. Federal Park Service, Jack called back, keeping his position behind a large pine. Identify yourself. FBI Special Agent Diana Chin, the voice responded. We received your emergency alert, Ranger Davis. Jack blinked in confusion. He hadn't been able to use the satellite phone. How had? The beacon in your equipment, Harmony whispered, noting his expression. Standard procedure in search and rescue. When a radio goes silent for too long, it triggers an automatic alert. Of course. Jack's missed check-ins would have raised flags, especially with a storm approaching. The Park Service's emergency protocols would have activated the GPS tracker in his gear. Step out slowly with your hands visible, please, Agent Chin instructed. Jack complied cautiously, keeping Harmony and Lisa behind him. Through the trees, he saw a woman in a dark jacket with FBI clearly visible across the back, her weapon trained professionally in their direction. Behind her, several more agents moved into position, their tactics indicating serious training. Ranger Davis? Chen asked, lowering her weapon slightly as she recognized his uniform. Yes, Jack confirmed. These women were being held captive by a cult operating in the park. There are armed men pursuing us, and more escapees heading for the Sector 12 Ranger Station. Chen nodded sharply and spoke into her radio. Team 2, redirect to Sector 12 Ranger Station for potential civilian protection. Team 3, we have hostiles in the vicinity, considered armed and dangerous. The efficiency with which the FBI team responded told Jack they weren't working blind. They had information beyond his missed check-ins. We know about the family, Chen explained, approaching them while her team established a security perimeter. We've been investigating them for 8 months after connecting several disappearances across 3 states. Your dispatcher called in your unusual behavior today, and when we cross-referenced your location with our investigation. My daughter, Jack interrupted urgently. Emma Davis. She was taken 15 years ago. She's one of the escapees heading for the ranger station. Something flickered across Chen's professional facade, surprise, then recognition. Emma Davis? We have her case file. She was one of the first connections we made. She studied Jack's face. You found her alive? The simple question broke through Jack's Ranger composure. He nodded, unable to speak past the sudden constriction in his throat. Chen's expression softened momentarily before returning to focused determination. Let's get you three to safety, then we'll coordinate with Team 2 to secure the other escapees. As they moved through the forest with the FBI team providing security, Jack heard the unmistakable thrum of helicopter rotors approaching. Through breaks in the canopy, he spotted two choppers circling the area, one with Park Service markings, the other unmarked but clearly law enforcement. We have the perimeter secured, Chen informed them as they reached a small clearing where a third helicopter waited. State police have blocked all roads in and out of the park. If your daughter's group made it to that ranger station, they're safe now. Jack barely had time to process this when his radio, silent for so long, suddenly crackled to life. Base to Davis, came the familiar voice of his dispatcher. Emergency channel override. Do you copy? He fumbled for the radio. Davis here. I copy. Jack. The dispatcher's voice broke protocol by using his first name, emotion evident even through the static. We've got them. Emma's here at headquarters. She's safe. The world seemed to tilt as relief crashed through him. Jack steadied himself against a tree, overwhelmed. Chen respectfully stepped away, giving him a moment of privacy. Is she okay? He managed to ask. Medics are checking them all out now. She's asking for you. In the helicopter en route to park headquarters, Jack learned the full extent of the operation now underway. The FBI had been building a case against the family for months, tracking disappearances and following financial trails that led to shell companies purchasing remote properties. They'd identified several potential compound locations but lacked probable cause for search warrants, until today. Your encounter gave us everything we needed, Chen explained over the helicopter's noise. We have teams moving on 3 locations simultaneously, including their main compound. What about Marcus and his men? Chen's expression hardened. 2 in custody. 1 still at large in the park, but he won't get far with this kind of coverage. She gestured to the window where Jack could see multiple vehicles with flashing lights converging on park roads below. At headquarters, chaos reigned as law enforcement, medical personnel, and park staff coordinated the expanding operation. Jack barely registered any of it, his focus narrowing to a singular purpose as he pushed through the crowd. And then, across the busy room, he saw her. Emma sat on an examination table, a blanket around her shoulders and a medical technician checking her vitals. She looked up, somehow sensing his presence, and their eyes met across the distance. Jack moved without conscious thought, people instinctively clearing a path between father and daughter. When he reached her, words failed them both. Emma simply collapsed against his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her, his ranger stoicism finally breaking as tears tracked down his weathered face. You made it, she whispered against his uniform. I promised I would, he replied hoarsely. Over Emma's shoulder, Jack saw Riley and the others receiving medical attention. Harmony and Lisa had been escorted in behind him, reuniting with their fellow escapees. Medical staff moved efficiently among them, treating injuries and checking for signs of long-term malnutrition and trauma. Agent Chen approached after giving them a few minutes, her expression grave but respectful. I hate to interrupt, but we need statements while the details are fresh. And... She hesitated, glancing at Emma. We found something at one of their satellite locations that you both need to see. Chen led them to a small conference room away from the chaos of the main operations center. The space had been hastily converted into a temporary evidence processing area, with labeled boxes and digital equipment arranged on tables around the perimeter. Jack kept his arm around Emma's shoulders, unwilling to break physical contact even for a moment, as if she might disappear again if he let go. We raided a storage facility registered to one of their shell companies, Chen explained, moving toward a table covered with sealed evidence bags. Most of it was supplies, weapons, fake identification documents, but we also found these. She carefully lifted a weathered cardboard box and placed it on the central table. Inside were dozens of manila folders, each bearing a number rather than a name. The family kept detailed records on everyone they took, Chen said quietly. Their backgrounds, family connections, psychological evaluations, everything they could use to break down and rebuild their victims' identities. Emma stared at the box, her face a mask of controlled emotion. They called it processing, she said, her voice distant. When a new person arrived, they'd spend weeks cataloging everything about them before beginning the cleansing. Jack felt physically ill at the clinical detachment in his daughter's voice, a protective mechanism developed through years of trauma. Chen opened one folder and turned it toward them. Emma Davis, Subject 8. She read from the label before stepping back respectfully. I think you should see this privately. I'll be right outside when you're ready to talk. The door closed softly behind her, leaving father and daughter alone with the physical documentation of their 15-year nightmare. With trembling hands, Emma reached for the folder. Inside were pages of handwritten notes detailing her progress, psychological weaknesses to exploit, and methods used to break her connection to her past life. Beneath these were photographs, surveillance images taken before her abduction showing Emma walking to school, playing in their front yard, and standing with Jack and his late wife at a community picnic. They watched me for weeks, Emma whispered, fingers tracing the edge of a photo. Learned my routines, my habits. The man who took me knew my name, knew I'd trust someone who seemed to know my parents. Jack forced himself to look at the evidence of how calculated his daughter's abduction had been, even as every fiber of his being wanted to shield her from it. But Emma wasn't a child anymore. She was a survivor who needed the truth, not protection from it. Deeper in the folder, they found something unexpected, items that the family had taken from Emma upon her arrival. A small butterfly hair clip her mother had given her. A school library card. And most surprisingly, a series of letters Emma had written during her captivity, letters to her parents that were never meant to be delivered. They made us write them as part of releasing our earthly attachments, Emma explained, her voice breaking as Jack carefully unfolded one of the yellowed pages. They said it would help us accept that our old lives were gone forever. Jack read the childish handwriting, tears blurring his vision. Dear Mom and Dad. *, I miss you so much. Father says I should forget you because the outside world is gone, but I can't. I remember how Dad makes pancakes shaped like animals, and how Mom braids my hair for school. I'm scared all the time here. They get mad when I cry. Please find me. I know you're looking for me. Love, Emma. Day 43. Jack had to look away, overwhelmed by the thought of his little girl desperately holding on to memories of home while being told her entire world had been destroyed. Emma gently took the letter from his hands and returned it to the folder. I stopped writing them after the first year, she said quietly. Started believing what they told us. It was easier than hoping. Jack struggled to find words adequate for the moment. We never stopped looking. Your mother. Is she? Emma couldn't finish the question. Jack shook his head gently. Cancer 3 years ago. She held on for so long, always believing we'd find you. He took a deep breath. She kept your room exactly the same. Said you need familiar things when you came home? Emma closed her eyes, absorbing this new loss. For her, the grief was immediate and raw. For Jack, it was a wound that had partially healed, now reopened by watching his daughter mourn the mother she'd never get to see again. A soft knock interrupted the moment. Agent Chen returned with Riley, who had insisted on being present for what came next. We've apprehended Marcus, Chen informed them. He was trying to reach a vehicle they had hidden near the eastern boundary. We've also located and secured their main compound. And the other family members? Emma asked, her concern evident for those still trapped in the cult's web of lies. 28 adults and 7 children in protective custody, Chen replied. The children will require special care. Some were born into the family and have never known the outside world. What about their leader? Jack asked. The father? Chen's expression hardened. Edward Simmons, former tech executive who disappeared after fraud allegations in 2005. He wasn't at the main compound, but we found evidence of a tertiary location. Every agency in 3 states is looking for him. Emma's hand found Riley's, drawing strength from the connection. He'll have contingencies, she warned. He always talked about the final retreat if the outside world ever found them. We'll find him, Chen assured her with quiet determination. People like Simmons may be clever, but they leave traces. Always. The debriefing continued for hours. Emma and Riley provided detailed information about the family's operations, hierarchy, and properties. Jack remained by his daughter's side throughout, marveling at her resilience and clarity despite everything she'd endured. It was nearly dawn when they were finally cleared to leave. Medical staff had insisted that Emma and the other survivors be transported to the regional hospital for comprehensive evaluation, but she had refused to go without her father. We can debrief more tomorrow, Chen said, seeing the exhaustion etched on their faces. You've given us enough to work with for now. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a wash-clean world glittering with raindrops catching the first hint of sunrise. Jack guided Emma toward his truck, the familiar routine of ending a shift now transformed into something profound. Your cabin, Emma said suddenly, looking up at her father. Is it still? Still there, Jack confirmed, surprised she remembered. I've kept it all these years. It's not much, but it's home. In the truck, driving through the quiet early morning, Emma stared out the window at the forest she'd been hidden within for so many years. Jack glanced at her periodically, still unable to believe she was really there. What happens now? She finally asked, her voice small in the cab of the truck. It was the question Jack had been turning over in his mind since the moment he'd recognized her in the cave. The practical challenges ahead were enormous: Emma's legal status, her medical and psychological needs, the criminal proceedings against the family, the media attention that would inevitably follow such a sensational case. But those weren't what Emma was really asking about. She wanted to know if there was a place for her in the world she'd been told no longer existed. If she could ever feel normal, safe, connected again. I don't know exactly, Jack admitted, choosing honesty over false reassurance. I know there's a lot to figure out. A lot to heal. Emma nodded, twisting her hands in her lap. I don't know how to be a person out here anymore, she confessed, echoing her words from the cave. Everything I learned growing up, how to talk to people, how to behave, what's real and what isn't, it all got mixed up with their lies. Jack pulled the truck over to the shoulder of the road, turning to face his daughter fully. In the growing light, he could see both the child he'd lost and the woman who had survived against impossible odds. Emma, he said gently, when you were little and learning to ride a bike, do you remember what happened? A faint smile touched her lips. I kept falling. And what did I tell you? That falling is part of learning, she recalled, the memory surfacing through layers of intervening trauma. And that you'd be there to help me back up until I could do it myself. Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Nothing's changed. We'll figure this out together, one day at a time. He reached across the seat, offering his hand. I can't give you back the years they stole. But I promise you're not alone in whatever comes next. Emma looked at his outstretched hand, weathered by decades in the wilderness, the same hand that had once bandaged her skinned knees and taught her to skip stones across the lake. She placed her own hand in his, the simple gesture bridging 15 years of separation. One day at a time, she repeated, the first fragile tendrils of hope in her voice. As they pulled back onto the road, the sun crested the mountains, casting long, hopeful shadows across the forest. Jack knew the path ahead would be neither straight nor easy. There would be setbacks, testimonials, therapy sessions, nightmares, and moments when the weight of all they'd lost would seem unbearable. But for the first time in 15 years, they would face whatever came next together. And for now, that was enough.